Hello everyone. I wanted to share one of the things I've been spending some of my time on these last 2 years when I haven't been very active on YouTube. Back in early March 2019, I went across the country to buy this 56-year-old Volvo that didn't run, hence the trailer. The car was cheap, suspiciously cheap. But I thought I had found a great deal and was super eager to get this home to just replace the fuel pump and hoon around. Don't get me wrong, I knew this was a car that needed some TLC. I just didn't know the sheer amount of it. Where do I start? Let me try to get this in somewhat correct order. One door has been butchered in a failed handle transplant. The torsion springs holding the trunk up are worn out, making the trunk slam shut at the most inconvenient time. There's visible light into the trunk along both rear fenders. The hood latch tends to only work when it wants to. The exhaust system was suspended with electrical cables. Easy fix. The fabric ceiling was so ruined it hung down 15 centimeters from the actual ceiling. I ended up taking it out. The interior has seen better days, or rather I imagine it has never been worse. The engine bay has some very interesting solutions. Just look at the interesting wiring job going on all over the place. On a positive note, that pod filter has to add at least 150 horsepower. On both sides of the hood you have these interesting rust holes. Both clutch and brake pedals are just kinda hanging in there, loosely connected to their hydraulics and a thin spike strip to keep them from coming out. The wiring in the cabin was also interesting, to say the least. Pretty much everything is soaked in oil beneath a certain level of the engine bay. At least I had changed the engine mounts here for new ones. Look at that subframe though. Slightly sketchy repair. You get the idea. The more places you look, the more sketchy stuff you find. Oh yeah, and I ended up having to tear out all the carpeting because they were completely soaked for some reason. After a lot of troubleshooting, I ended up getting the motor going. Just needed to change fuel filter, fuel pump, ignition cables, and fix a loose connection on the ignition coil, and renovate the carb. So now that I finally had the car running, I realized it won't shift into first and second once you've gotten up to speed without a lot of convincing. Great! Back home again to tear the gearbox apart. These M40 gearboxes are at least really small and cute. Nothing obvious could be seen from the exterior, besides being oily, but it did have the correct oil level. One of the biggest challenges was just keeping track of everything as I dived in to try to see what was wrong. I replaced 3 out of 4 synchros, the 4th didn't look that bad and I was feeling cheap. Whilst I was at it, I also gave it a cosmetic overhaul. Back in the car with the rear bracket freshly painted as well, nice contrast. I also replaced the handbrake cables since one of them were broken. Out again I went. Quite quickly, I ended up back home again. The front end is so bad that it's like a drunk driving simulator. The car just goes wherever it wants to go. Taking a better look at things, every single bushing was probably dead 10 years ago, and I'm pretty sure all that oil is from the damper. I have this thing for being thorough, so I tore everything off. And I discovered a mighty fine crack in the body. And this is supposed to be adjustable piece someone has welded stuck. And taking off the fender, I kinda start seeing how big these holes are on each side of the hood. Ouch. Clearly I need to fix the rust ASAP, so I start digging into it to find how far it's gone. And I'd say it's gone pretty far. Time to start building things back up. I'm just winging it here, I have no previous experience doing this stuff. Trying to rust protect stuff as I go, probably a bit obsessive about it. More plates, back in their place. Attaching a lot of small pieces is time inefficient but felt easier at the time. Trying to think of how to reattach plates so I don't weld myself into a corner. Finally having closed it back up, I gave it a generous coat of paint. It doesn't need to look good, it just needs to keep the moisture out. Also somewhat fix the crack. Well, that was fun, let's check on the other side. Ugh. On this side, someone had placed a plate on top of another rusted plate, causing it to rust way more here. I wire wheeled out as much as I possibly could, then brushed on rust converter anywhere I could reach, several times over. Then it's the usual patching. Moving on up, I discovered the rust goes further into the cab on this side as well. And this is how much I had to cut to get rid of that. Whatever, we can rebuild. Starting to feel unmotivated by all the gnarly looking welds, so I cleaned things up. Starting to get things back into shape. Just missing this piece I bent up separately. Put it in with a mix of plug and butt welds. And again, I don't care about looks at this stage, I just want to keep it rust free. Just a final top coat of black, So many hours, but a massive amount of rust removed on both sides. About that front end I was actually supposed to fix. It's really going places. Mostly the junkyard, but places. I ended up sandblasting, priming, and epoxy painting whatever could be reused. New hardware everywhere. Fasteners, bushing, springs, dampers, the whole kit. At least it looks really nice. Now we're on the subject of brakes. Reinstalling new stock brakes would have cost me twice as much as upgrading to bigger vented discs. So here we are. I had to fabricate custom mounts to get the calipers to sit right. Quite a lot of trial and error with these, but eventually got it sitting where I wanted. There were a few other problems as well. I had to machine the wheel hubs a bit to accept these brake discs. Oh, and drill a new hole pattern. And pressing new studs. Other than those 100 hours of work, it was smooth sailing. But hey, I'm pretty pleased with the results. Turning radius with the new stuff is slightly worse, but not by that much. The bigger tires hit the sway bar a bit, so that could be adjusted, I guess. But hey, it's drivable again. I have the bolt pattern I want up front. Rear still got the old and weird bolt pattern. With it finally being somewhat enjoyable to drive, I used it to get to work for a couple of weeks and had a lot of fun with it. But it probably shouldn't be news to anyone following this channel that I can't leave well enough alone, can I? Stay tuned.